Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy calm, immersive historical documentaries, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Today, we're diving into a story that stands between history and legend. A story shaped by war, fear, and propaganda. On one side, Mehmed II, the Ottoman sultan who conquered Constantinople. On the other, Vlad III, remembered by the world as Dracula. But here's the real question. Was this a battle between a hero and a monster? Or between two rulers fighting for survival? If you're ready, let's begin. Before we begin, let me ask you something. When you hear the name Dracula, what comes to your mind? A vampire, a monster who drinks blood, a dark castle hidden somewhere in Eastern Europe. Now let me ask a different question. What if the man we call Dracula was not a monster at all, but a ruler trapped between two worlds, fighting a war he could not win? History often turns its enemies into monsters, and few figures in history have been transformed into a legend as dark and distorted as Vlad III of Wallachia. But to understand this story properly, we must step away from novels, movies, and Gothic fiction. We must return to the 15th century, to the Balkans, to the Ottoman frontier, and to the reign of one of history's most powerful rulers, Mehmed II, known to history as Mehmed the Conqueror. This is not a story of good versus evil. It is a story of power, fear, survival, and propaganda. And most importantly, it is a story that looks very different depending on who is telling it. In Western Europe, Vlad III is remembered as a monster. In Ottoman records, he appears as a rebellious vassal. In Romanian national memory, he is often seen as a harsh but necessary ruler. So which one is true? The answer is uncomfortable. All of them, and none of them at the same time. Western chronicles, especially those written in German-speaking regions, describe Vlad as an inhuman tyrant. Pamphlets printed shortly after his death portray him impaling thousands, drinking blood, and ruling through terror alone. But here's something important most people don't realize. These texts were not neutral historical records. They were political weapons. Vlad ruled Wallachia, a small but strategically critical region caught between the Kingdom of Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. He was not powerful enough to dominate the region militarily, so he relied on fear as a tool. Fear toward his enemies, fear toward traitors, and yes, fear toward foreign powers. But fear works both ways. The same terror Vlad used to protect his throne was later used against him by his enemies, especially in Europe. And this is where the legend truly begins. Now let's pause here for a moment. Why would Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, care about a small principality like Wallachia? The answer is geography. Wallachia sat directly north of the Danube River, one of the most important natural borders of the Ottoman Empire in Europe. It functioned as a buffer zone, a protective layer between the Ottomans and Central Europe. For the Ottomans, Wallachia was not meant to be fully conquered. It was meant to be controlled indirectly. This system worked through vassalage. Local rulers were allowed to remain in power as long as they paid annual tribute, supplied troops when required, did not ally with Ottoman enemies. This was not unusual. In fact, it was one of the reasons the Ottoman Empire expanded so efficiently, and Vlad's family was deeply embedded in this system. Here is a detail often ignored in Western retellings. Vlad III did not grow up as an enemy of the Ottomans. As a young boy, he spent years inside the Ottoman court, alongside his brother Radu. They were sent as political hostages, a common practice of the time. But hostage does not mean prisoner in the modern sense. Ottoman records and later Turkish historians emphasize that Vlad received a proper education, military training, exposure to Ottoman administration and culture. He learned how the empire worked from the inside. This matters because it explains something crucial. Vlad did not fear the Ottomans because they were unknown to him. He feared them because he understood their power perfectly. And he also understood something else. Once Mehmed II had taken Constantinople in 1453, the balance of power in the Balkans had changed forever. There was no going back. Let's shift focus for a moment. Who was Mehmed II at this point? By the mid-15th century, Mehmed was not just another sultan. He was a ruler with an imperial vision. Ottoman chroniclers and later Turkish historians like Halil İnalcık describe Mehmed as highly educated, fluent in multiple languages, deeply interested in law, philosophy, and history. But make no mistake, he was also ruthless when necessary. Mehmed did not conquer Constantinople by chance. He planned it carefully, patiently, and methodically. And after 1453, he had one clear goal: to secure the empire's borders permanently. Wallachia was part of that plan. So let me ask you something. If you were Mehmed II, ruling a rapidly expanding empire, and one of your vassals stopped paying tribute, refused to send troops, and began secretly negotiating with your enemies, what would you do? From the Ottoman perspective, Vlad was not a misunderstood hero. He was a dangerous liability. And from Vlad's perspective, submitting fully to the Ottomans meant losing real independence forever. Both sides believed they were acting rationally, and that is what makes this conflict tragic. This is the moment where legend slowly overtakes reality. Western sources focus almost entirely on Vlad's brutality. Ottoman sources focus on his betrayal and rebellion. Romanian narratives focus on survival and resistance. Each side tells the story it needs to tell. And as we move forward, you'll see how psychological warfare replaced traditional battles. Fear became a political language, and propaganda shaped Vlad's legacy more than any battlefield ever did. But before we reach the infamous Forest of the Impaled, we need to understand why Vlad chose terror as his primary weapon. And to do that, we must look at the fragile nature of power in Wallachia itself. Let's slow down for a moment and really imagine Wallachia in the 15th century. This was not a strong kingdom. It was not unified, and it was certainly not stable. The throne of Wallachia was not inherited peacefully from father to son. It was seized, lost, reclaimed, and stolen again, often within the same decade. Boyars, the local noble class, held immense power. They could support a ruler one year and assassinate him the next. Now ask yourself this: how do you rule a land where your own nobles are more dangerous than foreign armies? This is the environment Vlad III stepped into. When he finally secured the throne, he did not inherit a functioning state. He inherited chaos. Why Vlad ruled through fear? Here is where many modern viewers misunderstand Vlad. They see cruelty and assume madness. But medieval power did not work like modern politics. Vlad knew something that many rulers before him had learned the hard way. Mercy invited rebellion. Fear discouraged it. According to Turkish historians such as İsmail Hakkı Uzunçarşılı, Wallachhia's internal instability was one of the main reasons the Ottomans never trusted its rulers fully. Vlad understood this perfectly, so he made a brutal calculation. If the boyars feared him more than they feared the Ottomans, they would not betray him. This is where impalement enters the story, not as random violence, but as state policy. Harsh? Yes. Effective. Terrifyingly so. The language of terror. Let's be honest with ourselves for a second. Public executions were not unusual in medieval Europe. England had hangings, France had beheadings, the Ottomans had their own severe punishments. What made Vlad different was scale and symbolism. Impalement was slow, visible, and unforgettable. It sent a message that did not need translation. "You may defeat me in battle," Vlad seemed to say, "but you will not survive ruling against me." This was not the act of a man who enjoyed cruelty for its own sake. It was the act of a ruler who believed fear was the only stable currency he possessed. Now let's shift perspective again. While Vlad was consolidating power internally, Mehmed II was watching carefully. Ottoman sources describe Mehmed as patient, but not forgiving. He tolerated disobedience only as long as it did not threaten imperial security. And Vlad was becoming a problem. Tribute payments stopped. Ottoman envoys were insulted, and according to some sources, executed. Border raids increased. At this point, Mehmed had a choice. Crush Wallachia immediately, or wait, observe, and strike when the moment was right. He chose the second option, because Mehmed understood something crucial. Vlad's greatest strength, fear, could also become his greatest weakness. The breaking point came when Vlad openly attacked Ottoman territory south of the Danube. This was no longer passive resistance. This was war. Villages were burned, supply lines disrupted, Ottoman authority openly challenged. From Mehmed's point of view, this could not be ignored. If Wallachia successfully defied the empire, other vassals might follow, and empires do not survive precedent. In 1462, Mehmed II personally led an army north. This alone tells us how seriously he took the threat. Ottoman chronicles emphasize that this campaign was not about revenge. It was about restoring order. But what the Ottoman army encountered shocked even experienced soldiers. You've probably heard this part before. Thousands of corpses, impalement stakes stretching across the landscape. A vision designed to break morale. Western writers describe Mehmed recoiling in horror, but Ottoman sources are more restrained. They describe the scene as disturbing, yes, but also as a calculated psychological tactic. And here's an important detail often ignored. The forest of the impaled was not aimed at Mehmed. It was aimed at his army. Vlad knew he could not defeat the Ottomans in open battle. So he attacked their will to fight. This was asymmetric warfare centuries before the term existed. Let me ask you something honestly. If you were outnumbered, surrounded, and facing the most powerful army of your age, would you choose honor or survival? Vlad chose survival, and for a brief moment, it almost worked. Despite his tactics, Vlad could not change reality. The Ottoman Empire had more soldiers, better logistics, stronger allies, and perhaps most importantly, Mehmed II had options. Instead of chasing Vlad endlessly, Mehmed supported an alternative ruler, Vlad's own brother, Radu. Radu was raised at the Ottoman court. He was familiar, predictable, controllable. From an imperial perspective, the choice was obvious. Vlad fled. He was captured, imprisoned, released years later, into a world that no longer needed him. And here's the cruel irony. Vlad's greatest weapon, fear, survived him, but his political power did not. Western Europe remembered the terror, not the context, and centuries later, a novelist named Bram Stoker would turn that terror into immortality of a very different kind. History rarely remembers balance. It remembers extremes. Vlad was not a vampire. Mehmed was not a villain. And Wallachia was not a fairy tale battleground. This was a collision of a declining medieval frontier, a rising imperial system, and a ruler who believed terror was his only shield. In the next part, we will examine how European propaganda shaped Vlad's image, why Ottoman historians viewed him differently, and what Turkish historical scholarship tells us that Western sources often ignore. How Vlad lost the war after it ended. Here's something most people don't realize. Vlad did not lose his legacy on the battlefield. He lost it on paper. After his fall from power, something far more dangerous than any army went to work against him: the printing press. In the German-speaking regions of Central Europe, pamphlets began circulating almost immediately. These texts described Vlad as a sadistic madman who impaled tens of thousands, burned children alive, dined among corpses, drank blood. Now pause for a second. Ask yourself this: why did these stories spread so quickly and so eagerly? Because Europe needed a monster. In the mid-15th century, Europe was terrified. Constantinople had fallen. The Ottomans were advancing, and Christian rulers were struggling to explain why. Creating a barbaric Eastern enemy helped unify fear. But Vlad complicated that narrative. He was Christian, European. Yet his methods were more brutal than those attributed to the Ottomans. So the solution was simple: turn him into something inhuman. By doing so, Europe could say, "This is not us. This is not Christian violence. This is madness." And so the myth began to grow. What Turkish historians point out. This is where Turkish historical scholarship becomes crucial. Historians like Halil İnalcık and Uzun Çarşılı consistently remind us of something important. Ottoman sources do not describe Vlad as insane. They describe him as unpredictable, violent, politically dangerous, but still rational. Ottoman chronicles focus on his rebellion, not his cruelty. Why? Because cruelty alone was not unusual in the 15th century. What mattered was loyalty. From the Ottoman perspective, Vlad's crime was not impalement. It was defiance. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Why is Vlad remembered as a monster, while other rulers who killed thousands are remembered as kings and conquerors? Because history is written by those who survive and those who control the narrative. Impalement was shocking, yes, but so was burning, so was hanging, so was mass slaughter after sieges. Yet only Vlad's violence became legend, not because it was unique, but because it was useful. Mehmed II and restraint. Another myth we need to address. Western stories often imply that Mehmed II was horrified by Vlad's brutality. Ottoman sources do not support this dramatic image. They describe Mehmed as calm, analytical, strategic. He did not retreat because he was frightened. He adjusted his strategy. This distinction matters. Mehmed understood that terror could not replace governance. Fear might win battles, but systems win empires. This is why Mehmed supported Radu, not because Radu was kinder, but because he was manageable. By the late 15th century, Vlad was no longer a ruler. He had become a symbol. To Europeans, a warning about unchecked brutality; to Romanians, a symbol of resistance; to the Ottomans, a lesson in the dangers of unstable vassals. And symbols are easier to reshape than people. Centuries later, Bram Stoker did something fascinating. He took the name Dracula, meaning son of the dragon, and stripped it from its historical context. He didn't care about Wallachia or Mehmed II or Ottoman politics. He cared about fear, and fear sells. The vampire Dracula was not born in Wallachia. He was born in Victorian England's imagination. So here's a question for you. If Vlad had ruled peacefully, paid tribute, and obeyed Mehmed II, would we even remember his name today? Probably not. History does not reward moderation. It remembers extremes. The real tragedy of Vlad's story is not his cruelty, it's his isolation. He stood between an unstoppable empire, a fearful Europe, a disloyal nobility, and he chose fear because he saw no other option. That choice made him famous. It also destroyed him. In the final part, we will answer the most important questions of all. Was Vlad a hero, a villain, or simply a product of his time? Did Mehmed II have any real alternative? And what does this story tell us about how history creates monsters? This is where everything comes together. Was Vlad a hero, a tyrant, or something else? So now we arrive at the question everyone asks. Was Vlad III a hero, a tyrant, or simply a monster? The honest answer is far less dramatic and far more uncomfortable. Vlad was a ruler shaped by fear, scarcity, and impossible choices. He did not inherit strength. He did not inherit unity. He inherited a land that could collapse at any moment. And in such a world, morality was a luxury. Let's not judge the 15th century by 21st century standards. This was a world where loyalty was temporary, violence was public mercy, was often mistaken for weakness. Rulers were not expected to be kind. They were expected to survive. Vlad survived longer than many before him, but survival came at a cost. Turkish historians repeatedly stress one point. Vlad was not exceptional in his brutality. He was exceptional in how visibly he used it. The Ottomans understood power differently. They believed stability mattered more than terror. Systems mattered more than individuals. This is why Mehmed II outlasted Vlad. Not because he was kinder, but because he ruled through institutions, not fear alone. Mehmed II did not see himself as a regional ruler. He saw himself as an emperor. And emperors do not rely on emotion. They rely on continuity. When Vlad became unpredictable, Mehmed replaced him, not out of hatred, out of necessity. This is an important distinction. Let me ask you one last question. If you were Vlad, outnumbered, surrounded, distrusted by your own nobles, ignored by Europe, would you have chosen differently? History loves to judge, but history rarely stands where its subjects once stood. Vlad's defiance gave him legend, but it cost him his throne, his allies, his future, and eventually his humanity, at least in memory. Because once a man becomes a symbol, the man himself disappears. The vampire myth did something powerful. It froze Vlad in time. It removed politics, removed context, removed nuance, and replaced it with immortality through fear. But history is not a horror novel. It is a record of human decisions under pressure. So how should we remember this conflict? Not as civilization versus barbarism, good versus evil, but as empire versus frontier, stability versus defiance, system versus individual. Will Mehmed II represented the future? Vlad represented resistance to inevitability, and history almost always sides with inevitability. The real lesson of Mehmed II and Vlad III is not about blood, it is about power. Power that adapts, survives. Power that resists without support, becomes legend, and then disappears. So the next time you hear the name Dracula, remember this. Behind the fangs, behind the castle, behind the myth, there was a ruler standing alone between two worlds, and a sultan building an empire that would outlive them both.